Bobby, how's it going this afternoon, brother?
It is going well for me. How about with you?
It's fantastic, man. We got a lot of changes happening at the company. Crappy weather in Columbus, Ohio. I'm sure you get a little bit of that in Maryland too. But
Yeah,
we're making do, man.
yeah, it was 17 degrees this morning, so I delayed my morning run to turn into an afternoon run because like, not happening.
Well, you're tougher than I am. Tuesday's my cardio day, so I was like, should I run? And I was like, I'm just gonna do some burpees inside. So that's what we did instead.
Yeah,
But here we are, man. So Bobby, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been up to over the last handful of years?
yeah. So I'm a lawyer by training. I graduated Harvard Law School back in 2002. At the beginning of my career, did what you might think of it, or what people lawyers think of as in some ways kind of the dream career.
Okay.
I worked for a court of appeals judge, federal court of appeals judge in Arkansas for a year. Who he was a guy who Clinton twice thought about appointing to the Supreme Court. So I mean, kind of top tier guy.
Mm.
Then came to the DC area, worked at a couple of premier law firms where I drafted briefs for the Supreme Court, courts of appeals, and did a lot of other fun stuff. The second one of those law firms, I was mentored first by a guy that at the time I just called Neil. Now I'd have to call him Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. So,
Ah, wow.
you know, I was doing all that, became a federal prosecutor so I could get on my feet, kind of standing up trial experience, which you don't get at law firms quite often.
What's a federal prosecutor going to be managing?
So basically, any federal crimes. So I tended to, theoretically, I was a white collar prosecutor, so doing fraud, counterfeiting, things like that. But I was the only guy in the office where I got a job in Fort Worth. They're really hard jobs to get. So I moved to Fort Worth to do it. I was the only one there who didn't have prior experience as a prosecutor at a state level.
Got it.
So there were a lot of guys with drug cases who they didn't really want to try the case. So they'd throw it to me a week before trial and I would just try the case to have fun and get the experience doing it. So did that for 3 years and then was going to move back to the DC area, had an offer on the table to go back to the firm I was at. But I was like, yeah, maybe I should try something else.
Mm.
And so I went and I found this weird little law firm of two guys that I just found them on the internet and I just sent them an email. And I made a very different choice at that point and joined them. Entrepreneurial firm. They handled cases often on a contingency fee basis,
Mm.
didn't have cash flow. So I joined them under the understanding that I might go 6 months without getting a paycheck, and that was the way it was going to work.
How did you decide on that little firm in particular?
It's hard to figure out how I decided on it. I like the idea that it was at such an early stage that I would be able to have a lot of control.
Mm.
My dad was an entrepreneur, ran a chain of drugstores in deep South Texas that expanded as I was a kid. So I kind of had this itch to be a professional and to be an owner.
Mm.
That's always had been my thinking when I went into law. And then I'd been at these really big law firms where theoretically I would have been a partner, but not really. I
You're
mean,
you're
I would have owned
always
like,
kind of an employee, right?
yeah, I mean, theoretically I'd be an owner, but I'd be at a 0.0001% owner kind of a thing. So not really, any level of control. So I knew I didn't want that.
Can we pause right there? Can you explain
Yeah.
how this law firm partnership thing works? Because I hear that, oh, I made partner, and I'm like, oh yeah, well, but what does that actually even mean? And can you
So
break that down for me?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because in most businesses, let's just be clear, in most businesses, partnership is the worst possible form there is. It doesn't work.
Okay.
Partnerships tend not to work well because people disagree and things like that. Law firms is like the one place where it's continued,
Okay.
but it's gotten harder and harder. It used to be you'd go into a firm and depending on what firm and what level of firm, the expectation was if you stayed long enough, you would make partner.
Okay.
They would groom you to that point and you would become a partner in the firm. And it just means you're part of the ownership structure, but your ownership would be tiny depending on the size of the firm. One of the firms I was at, the first one I started out at a law school had, I don't know, somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 lawyers nationwide. So,
Right.
those aren't all partners, but a lot of people. So it's basically a big corporation.
Fair to say there's like
Um,
50 partners.
Oh, no, there would have been hundreds, probably
Okay.
5, 600. I
Okay.
mean, it's
Well,
not a tiny percentage, but it's the minority, not the majority. But over time, the legal profession has gotten less profession and more business. And so as a result, now a lot of people if you look at a lot of law firms, a lot of people who are called partners aren't actually partners. They don't have any ownership stake. They just call them partners because they can bill you for a higher amount if you're a partner.
Got it.
It's kind of what it comes down to.
Got it.
Um, but a lot of them, they still will eventually make you a partner after 8 years or so, is when you can start to be considered for it. And there are some exceptions. There's some small trial, or not small. I mean, there's some trial firms down in Texas that I know of where, they used to consider you after 5 years,
Mm.
and, where partnership was a big deal. But the problem was, a lot of those firms, there was an old saying, it was one of the New York firms, but it applies here. It's making partner at those firms is like, it's winning a pie eating contest where the prize is more pie,
Mm.
because, you work your tail off to make partner, just to work your tail off as a partner is kind of the way it works at a
Mm.
lot of places.
Right.
Um, but I kind of decided that that big firm was not for me, and so I knew I wanted something else. Again, I can't even remember why I decided on these particular guys. I think it was just the overall feel of it, and they were. I think they were maybe 5, 6 years. One of them was 5 or 6 years senior to me as a lawyer, and one of them was 3 or 4 years senior to me as a lawyer. So it felt more like I would really be part of the true ownership.
And was it a particular, like, area of law that you were interested in? It was just, like,
Nope.
2 guys that you found on the internet, and you're like, "These guys look cool. I wanna work for their firm."
Yeah, and again, it was I wanted to do, and there's different ways to think about it, but basically, I did complex civil litigation. So handled lawsuits, complex disputes, and they did areas of law that I didn't know anything about. They had some antitrust cases going. They had some other things, but they had class action lawsuits going. They had a bunch of different stuff, but nothing that I cared all that much about. And I started with them, and fell into taking over just this weird area of law that I didn't know anything about before, which was patent litigation,
Mm, okay,
disputes about inventions.
okay.
And we had some guys who had invested, bought some patents, and were suing people who were clients. And I didn't know anything about antitrust law, which was what their specialty was. Those two guys had done a lot of that and had a big case going at the time.
Mhm,
So they just kind of handed off this patent stuff to me and let me handle it.
okay.
And so my first case that I really worked on, it was already going before I joined the firm, but it really came back to life without boring you the details. You kind of have some preliminary stuff in a case before much happens. And right as that was starting to get decided and starting to be the point where the case was come back to life is when I joined. And so they gave it to me. And it was me against one of the, I think, 5 biggest law firms in the country. At various points, I counted 11 different lawyers on the other side that I had interacted with, and it was
Mhm.
just me on
Yep,
our side,
yep.
while I'm learning patent law along the way, just trying to understand what the heck I'm even talking about.
Mhm,
And it was a great experience. So that ended up being what I did. But I made a critical mistake when I joined that firm, which was, although we had this idea of a theoretical, hey, here's your pay, but you understand you may not get paid, but we'll make it whole when we have money coming in, et cetera. But we never talked about the next piece of, how would I become a partner? When would I become a partner? Under what terms would I become a partner? And, at a big law firm, not a big deal, because it's kind of, you're getting paid every week, so you don't care.
right.
But at a place like this, I had all the downside, right? If the firm went belly up, I was out and didn't have any money, and I'd gone, as I said, months without pay, and I had no guaranteed upside. Like, if one of these class action lawsuits had hit big and they'd made, $100 million in fees for the firm, I wasn't guaranteed anything.
Mm,
So my wife got pregnant, and I said, "Hey, we got to talk about this. We got to figure out, partnership, actually making me a partner." And we talked it through at various points for about 6 months, and it never really worked. And then it kind of came to a head. We had a conference call. It was snowing outside. I remember that. We were all at home. It was a Sunday night.
mhm,
We had a conference call. One of the guys said something where I was glad we weren't in person, because I might have thrown a coffee cup at him
mm,
if we'd been in person.
mhm,
And at the end of that call, I just looked over at my wife and my brother-in-law, who happened to be at my house at the time. I said, "Let's go to the office. I'm dropping my stuff off and picking up my stuff." And I left at that point and started my own law firm the next day,
mm,
with no plan, with no ideas. But I just said, it's not going to work. And so I made that hard decision. And it's one of those things that, look, a lot of business owners make that mistake. They enter into relationships without clearly defining the relationship and what's going to happen. And I saw that in a lot after the fact when I'm on law firm. I had a lot of people coming to me after the things had hit the fan, not before. So I saw that as a common theme. But that was kind of when I started even more of an entrepreneurial venture. I had one client who came with me. Luckily, we got a settlement. It was on a contingency fee. So I got a big chunk of money, not a big, but a decent chunk of money pretty quickly for my own firm, which
Mm.
allowed me to survive for a while. But at the time, I had a lot of time and I didn't have a lot of clients. So I started trying to learn marketing
Mm.
and started by reading every book I could find about lawyer or marketing for lawyers.
Ah,
Threw all those out because lawyers are not good at
I was
marketing.
gonna ask, what was the conventional wisdom at that time for marketing a law firm?
Well, the problem is lawyers think of marketing as sending a newsletter to other lawyers, writing blog posts for other lawyers, and schmoozing with other lawyers. Well, I mean, I guess if you're working for big companies where in-house counsel that are the people hiring you, that
Mhm.
makes sense. But for normal lawyers, that doesn't because you know you're not talking to your
Right.
clients, and so it was a problem. So I quickly chucked those out and I just started looking at marketing and I fell into the online marketing world
Okay.
and got myself HubSpot inbound marketing certified at one point
Alright.
because
Yep. Mhm.
it seemed like a cool thing. And it's funny on Facebook, the past few days, I've been getting a bunch of memories because 10 years ago, so 2015, I published, I don't know exactly when it went to actually was available, but it went to press about 10 years ago, a book called Patent Litigation Primer. It was my content marketing inbound,
Yep. Yep.
build that. And I can say I was an Amazon bestseller as a lawyer, which doesn't mean much because I think I made like 5 or 10 sales in the first week. And that was enough in this super niched area because
Yep.
not a lot of people writing about that.
Mhm.
But so I did that for a while. Then in 2016 and 2017, I was working with a life coach because it was kind of like, I didn't really like what I was doing.
Re
I liked the law. I love the law still. But being a lawyer and being a lawyer the particular way I was doing it and practicing, I didn't enjoy because I was fighting with people all day, every day.
What do you mean
And
by that? Like, you said you like the law, but what was it? Like, you're doing civil cases or what?
yeah, so I was doing civil cases. I was fighting with people about, various things in civil lawsuits, but I would half the time end up having to fight with my clients because they were head in the clouds, didn't have realistic expectations. And then the other side would just be completely irrational about things. And not in that, but to give you some sense, in one of my lives as a lawyer, I had to fly from Bethesda down to West Palm Beach, Florida twice, two different times to get the opposing side to give me legible copies of a document. I mean, we're talking document that literally as they were copying it, it like slid so you couldn't see it,
Yeah.
but it was critical stuff. It was an accounting fraud case and it was the accounting work papers. You got to have that stuff.
Mhm.
And I had to go down twice, first for a mediation and then before the judge. And the judge, like we get there and the judge looks over at the other side and says, "Are we really here for this? Give him legible copies." But I mean, that was my life
Mhm.
going and doing stuff like that.
Mm.
Uh, so I'm working with this life coach. We talk about life, relationships, everything. And then we'd been working together about 6 months. And she asked me, "Do you like what you do for a living?" And for the first time, I kind of stumbled and I admitted to someone that I didn't.
Mm.
Like I said, I love the law. I love the idea of the law, but practicing it wasn't fun for me anymore.
Well, you're seeing kind of the worst sides of people in that particular,
Yeah.
um, area. My father was like a divorce and mediation lawyer.
Oh, yeah.
So
That would be even worse, I bet.
which he jokes, like, "I went into the worst field that you can go into. I went into, like, divorce and mediation in a small town, not at a big firm." So he's like,
Oh,
"I wasn't doing it for, like, the money. I live in Columbus, Ohio." He's like, "I would've went and worked for a big firm in Columbus if that's what I wanted, but,
yeah.
it's kind of the path I chose. Someone has to do that." Um,
Yeah.
but yes, he would always tell us, like, "Don't become a lawyer, it's too stressful." And I'm
Yeah.
sure that it's not the actual job of being a lawyer, it's just you're hanging out with these people who hate each other, and you're just, like,
Yep.
seeping in that hatred of,
Well,
like, mommy hates daddy and, hopes that her new boyfriend dies in a car accident kinda thing.
yeah. But I mean, here's the craziest thing. So when I was a prosecutor, criminal law, criminal cases, I got along with all the lawyers on that I ever dealt with, even even the defendants. Like they were nice to me. They respected me. They weren't mean. But man, you get in civil case, people fighting about money, and everybody hates everybody. And part of it is it's a bigger world. So like I wasn't seeing the same lawyers over and over
I
again. So
see.
they could treat you like garbage and
Mm,
know there was not going to be any consequences.
I see.
But that was part of it too. I was just like, oh, and it was just this thing. And part of the problem was the kind of law I was doing, these cases that I was handling, they were very big cases. Couldn't handle a lot of them at a time. And a good number of them were on contingency, even when had my own firm. So all of a sudden, I have all this added pressure
Got
of
it.
if there's a bad ruling, if my client refuses to take a settlement, if all these things happen, all of a sudden it's like, how am I supporting my family? So there was all this added pressure on top of it, which didn't really suit me.
Could you give me an
But
example of what a typical case might be? Like,
so I had a guy that I represented. He had a patent for he was a chiropractor
okay,
and had a patent on something for, it's hard to explain, but basically putting patches with various chemicals on certain places in the body to relieve pain or to do things like that. So he'd gotten a patent for it.
okay,
And there was a company, a multi-level marketing company that was selling basically that exact thing.
okay.
And so we sued them, basically saying you're infringing the patent and we're seeking damage.
Okay,
We
so
weren't seeking to stop them from doing it, but basically they had to pay a royalty to our guy because he owned the patent.
I was gonna ask, where's the first demand? Like, okay, ostensibly, they've been selling it for multiple years, and they've
Yeah,
made I'm sure if it's just, a guy in his basement selling it, there's really not much to do,
right,
right?
right.
It's just like, "Hey, quit."
Yeah,
But they've clearly been selling it for a period of time and making money.
yep.
So what's the first thing that we're doing there? Are we making a demand?
Yeah, so normally you would start. I mean, if you could find a good thing, you would start by sending a letter with a demand. The problem is, and it all depends on who it is. And that case was an interesting one because in the patent litigation world now, oftentimes the person suing is not the inventor. Patents are sold, and they've just turned into another thing that you can purchase and then turn them into money. So people buy patents up and then sue people on those patents, and you're allowed to do that.
Interesting.
It's perfectly
Like
allowed.
an asset, you're like buying
Yep.
an asset category, which is patents.
Exactly. And then you own it and you can sue people for that because you own the rights. And so this was an interesting case where it was the actual inventor.
Okay.
Part of the problem is the inventors always think their invention is the best thing since sliced bread. Like every inventor is that way. They always do. So they can be more difficult clients because they're not viewing it simply as a monetary, what makes sense monetarily here.
Right. Makes sense.
But so, you will generally start with a demand letter. Those rarely work anymore now. There was a period where there were certain companies who you sent a demand letter and, you could get, depending on the company, you might get them to pay 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, $100,000 because they just knew it was going to cost them more than that in lawyers if you filed suit. And
Right.
so some companies did that, but a lot of them didn't. And it depended on what their experience was, how often they expected to get sued by patent or by patent owners, et cetera. And so there's just a lot of different factors. And in that case, I really can't remember. I'm sure we sent a demand letter, but I don't know. But then you file suit, and it kind of goes on. And a patent is really different because the first thing that happens in most cases is the judge has to construe what does the patent actually mean,
Okay.
what's actually protected. And so it's kind of a weird thing that it's very different than any other kind of litigation you'll ever deal with because of that. You have this first step, and then that really determines a lot of what happens in the future of the case.
Now, question there. What judge are you getting? Where are you suing them?
It's federal court. Federal court. It all depends on where you are. It used to be the case that everybody wanted to file in the Eastern District of Texas, of all things, because those judges tend to be very favorable to patent owners.
Okay.
And it's like Marshall, Texas, which doesn't really have much of anything, but they have billions of dollars of patent litigation in this little small town in this little courthouse every year.
Interesting.
But there has to be some tie to it.
Right.
And Congress actually tightened that up. I can't remember when, late late 2010s of some point, they kind of tightened up and said, no, you can't just go there. There has to be a decent tie. And for the life of me, I don't remember. I don't remember if it was in California that we filed that case or Florida. There's a few different places that you can look at, but you kind of figure out where is a good place that makes sense. And you tend to file there.
And do you need
Um,
some connection to that place? Like, let's say my business is incorporated in
yeah.
Columbus, Ohio, and I sell my product nationwide.
Yeah. The bigger thing is the defendant has to have some tie to it, generally
So
speaking.
the
So
other
generally,
company has to
yeah,
be
generally who you're suing has to have some time. And that was the big tightening. So it used to be, hey, if they offered a product for sale nationwide, that would have been good enough. But now you've got to prove a bigger nexus than that. You generally have to prove some kind of physical presence or physical location, um, or where they're incorporated.
so
So
my company probably would sue in the state of Ohio, probably
you would probably get sued in Ohio, but you would sue them depending on where they are. Delaware became a commonplace because obviously a lot of companies are
registered there.
formed in
I
Delaware,
see.
registered in Delaware, so that becomes a place. But the Delaware courts got so overwhelmed that oftentimes you're waiting a year for basic initial decisions, and so it can be kind of slow. Whereas when you're the plaintiff, you want things to move quickly normally because it puts pressure on the other side.
I guess I'm a
Uh,
little confused why I would sue you in the state that you're in. Doesn't that put like a burden on me? Because it's like
it
I
does.
live in Ohio, but this, asshole in California is infringing on my patent. I have to go to California to sue him? Shouldn't he have to
You don't
come to
necessarily
me?
You don't necessarily have to go to California, but the logic of it is there's this concept of jurisdiction. And there's a concept in law that basically, as a defendant, you can't be brought into court somewhere that doesn't have jurisdiction over you. And broadly speaking, there is a lot of leeway there.
Okay.
So it's not like that. But there has been some tightening up of it to say, hey, you can't just sue anywhere. And the problem was a lot of people weren't suing where they were. They were just finding a place that was good for patent litigation. Like I said, this Eastern District of Texas. I don't want to say nobody's there, but the biggest cities in the Eastern District of Texas are Plano, which is just north of Dallas, and then Tyler.
Right.
So there are some companies based there,
Right.
but not a lot.
Right.
But you had all of these cases being filed there because the judges there were very favorable for plaintiffs.
Okay.
And so people want to file there. And depending on where you are, like if you were suing, for example, a foreign corporation, and I'd have to look at it, I think you could sue in your home district, but oftentimes you're going where they are or where they're formed. And like I said, if it's in Delaware, there was a thing, hey, if I go to Delaware, at least I know the judges are good judges, understand patent law. Because part of the problem is if you get a judge who's never handled a patent
That's
case,
what I was gonna ask. I mean, what if I have an advanced electronic piece of equipment and then I just get Bill, who's 78 and, like, has been, doing judging for a long time, like, he's not gonna understand the technology that I have in my product and how this totally non-related product is still infringing on me.
yeah. And again, the strange thing, ultimately, you're going to have to prove that to a jury, not to a judge, which is the funniest thing. Like,
Jeez.
you're getting a jury. I mean, think about that. You're going to get a bunch of people who, there's all this old joke that, the only people who end up on jury duty are people who can't get out of jury
Right, I was
duty,
gonna say, you're
which,
just gonna get a bunch of, like, warehouse staff people. We love warehouse staffers because we have a bunch of them here, but, like, I know those folks are not gonna sit in on complex, like, medical device equipment patent law and be like, "Yeah, this is so interesting."
yeah, which I mean, and that's why, I mean, part of the job as a lawyer, when you have that, you have experts who are doing all that, but, your job is to get experts who can speak in plain language. And it's kind of a joke, not in the patent world, but when I was a prosecutor and I had to coach the um, law enforcement people, and I say, coach, like, don't say the female exited the vehicle. Say the woman got out of the car because like they talk, the female exited the vehicle. I'm like, no one other than a law enforcement officer ever uses that language. And
Yeah.
it's the same thing in patent law. You have to put it in a way that makes it clear, and you have experts, and again, the judges will dig in, and some judges will get a technical advisor, kind of an outside person that helps them before the trial to kind of analyze things and help them understand stuff. But it's not even just the technology, it's even understanding how a patent case works, and understanding the different things in a patent case is just because it's this weird different area with these different procedures, it can be tough. And so, generally speaking, I would never have filed a case in a district where we didn't have confidence that the judges would understand patent law
Got it.
as a general concept, because you never know what you're going to get. At least go somewhere where you have a known quantity because you understand they're going to, you have an even or a fair playing field. It was funny when you're talking about that judge example. It was not a patent case, but I did have this case way, way long time ago. Represented a technology company who sued Facebook. The company we represented made a plugin for your web browser that allowed you to basically MySpace your Facebook. In other words, you could do all like you could put the side things and decorate the white space on Facebook with things that look like MySpace. And trying to explain to the judge in this case, like, well, but it's Facebook. They have a right to control what happens on their property. I'm like, this isn't on their property. This is literally only on my website, on my computer, on my personal browser that this even shows up.
Oh, I
But
see.
the judge couldn't understand it. He
Okay.
literally could not understand this concept and this distinction. And trying to get I don't remember how old he was. He wasn't even 78, but judge is not known as technically savvy to start with, and so it's an interesting world when you get there. That's for sure.
Okay, sorry I interrupted. You were saying this guy invented this patch,
Yeah,
mixed level marketing company. You thought that they had something that was too
yeah,
similar.
yeah,
So you send them a demand and then it moves on to a lawsuit.
yeah, yeah. We filed a lawsuit. Went through. I don't even remember how long it took, but we eventually had multiple mediations where a mediation is there's no binding authority. It's just someone who tries to talk both sides to the middle. Their job is often to beat people up and to show them the weakness of their side. I mean, we had won some rulings that meant they couldn't throw us out of court, which is always a big part of it.
Mhm.
But it was stressful. I think it was in Florida. I think that case we'd filed in Florida, so I had to fly down to Florida for that. And I mean, it was it was a challenge. Ultimately, we got a settlement. It was confidential, so I can't say how much or what was involved. But there was a lot of back and forth. A lot of money came out of my pocket before we got a resolution. I had to hire experts,
Mm.
pay experts to do analysis. And those things cost money, and so that's the kind of stress. But you can imagine when you have all that, I've got this money on the hook, plus I got to get some kind of good judgment or I'm out and get nothing. So anytime I would get an email, I mean, I don't say my heart would sink, but it was this negative feel because I was
Yeah.
like, is this the next shoe going to drop? And then even if it wasn't a bad ruling, it was like, is the other side doing something stupid that's going to ruin my week? Because now I've got to respond to them. Is the judge issuing an order that says I've got to come to a hearing? I mean, I had some cases where a judge would issue an order, say, we're having a hearing in 2 days in person. You have to be there. Like, and I'm in DC and it's in California. So okay, I got to get a flight out there and I just got to deal with that. And judges would just do that. And they didn't care. There is an old joke. What's the difference between a federal judge and God? God doesn't think he's a federal judge
Mm.
because judges think they are God. So, that was part of what my life was and wasn't loving it, wasn't loving the actual practice.
Was
And,
it a profitable endeavor while you were at it?
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it was profitable. I had an associate attorney working for me at various points. Um, but it was just hella
And it
stressful.
sounds also pretty unpredictable too.
Yes, unpredictable, hella stressful, and various things. So my daughter, I missed, and again, it's one of those things. Until you have a kid, you think these things are stupid. But I missed my daughter's, um, pr- uh, not kindergarten, I guess pre-K graduation ceremony because I had to go to a hearing, and then I was going to have to miss her first day of kindergarten,
Mhm.
where it was going to be at her elementary school, and I was looking forward to the idea of walking her to school and all that.
Mhm.
And I was going to have to miss it. Luckily, that got canceled. But at some point, I just said, "Oh, I just don't want this. I don't want my life controlled by other people." Where I have to just leave and I'm missing out on my life. And so when I told that life coach I wasn't liking what I did, I always joke that life coaches, part of the problem is with them is they won't let you just wallow in your sorrow. So she said, okay, great. What are we going to do about that?
Mhm.
And I said, if I knew I'd be doing it. And we talked about it. And she was the one who suggested, I could see you starting a business where you advise businesses, you go into podcasts, you go into radio, you talk about the legal stuff and you help business owners understand these things. I said, that's interesting. And we ended that call. And then by the time we had our next call 2 weeks later, I had hired a firm to pitch me to podcasts. And I think I already had a couple of podcasts booked. And that was the start of what I do now. So that was early 2017.
Okay.
And
So you've been at it like going on a decade now.
yeah. So that was the start of this. And it was funny that those early podcasts, I would send them my lawyer picture, which I was in the lawyer pose, kind of sideways with
Yeah, yeah,
my
yeah.
arm in a suit, in a tie, everything. And I don't, I haven't worn a suit. I wear shorts and flip flops as much as I can, and so it was funny that that was the thing. And on those old podcasts, I think it was still listed as Robert Klinck because that's my legal name. I'm like, shit. The only person who calls me Robert is the judge and my mom when she's mad at me.
Right.
So we're not doing that anymore. But it took me a while. In 2017, I started this process of saying, you know what, I'm going to build this online business. And I did a very me thing, which is I went all in and I invested that year multiple tens of thousands of dollars, not $100,000, but a ton.
Mm.
This is a podcast booking agency. I bought ClickFunnels software and coaching on how to use it, how to build funnels with it.
There you
I
go.
hired a Facebook ads expert and then paid for ads to build my list. I did all these things and I was ready. I was working on my webinar. I'll never forget. I was had a webinar that I was excited for that was in November. It was going to launch this program called Safeguard Your Online Genius. I was going to teach people how to do all this, how to protect themselves. It would be course and legal templates to help them. Did the day before the webinar, I practiced it because I'd heard, hey, you got to practice it. You got to be at an 11 because you're going to come off flat if you don't. And so I did that. I recorded. Hey, this is great. So then I did the webinar. I was like, I nailed it. And then I went to open my thing. I'm like, surely someone's bought. Crickets.
Uh,
I think I had a 7-day open cart. One person bought for like $629. I don't remember, something like that. And then she asked for a refund on day 29 of a 30-day, no questions asked refund policy, having never opened anything in the program. And so that was my introduction. So I ended 2017 having made zero and having spent, I think it was somewhere on the order of $50,000 I'd spent on the business.
okay.
And I was
Okay.
at that point. And
Your wife's telling you, you got any more of those patent cases that we used to do?
yeah, I was,
You got any
you
of
know,
those lying around?
it was not great. And so that's where we were. And I didn't know, but I knew I liked what I was doing, even if it wasn't successful yet. So I decided to kind of give myself one last chance in 2018, the beginning parts of 2018. And it started slowly. I think I first started by doing like a pay what you want to come to some seminars type of thing. Like you pick how much you were going to pay me. And then I joined a couple of different programs at that point. One of them in retrospect, made no sense. It was about how to build a high ticket program. In legal world, you don't need to figure out how to build a high ticket program. My whole point was how to make this accessible so people could afford it and get their protection in place before things went bad rather than hiring a lawyer. But I did that. But separately, I joined this program called B School, which is kind of in the online course world.
Mm.
And I joined it through an affiliate named Amy Porterfield. And Amy had a group of people who joined this program through her. And it was like 1,000 of us. And I was in that group. And she basically said she was going to do an engagement contest and give prizes to people who were engaged in the group. So I just started engaging like crazy. Well, there weren't a lot of legal questions for me to answer,
Mhm.
but I found I knew a lot of stuff about marketing at that point. So I was being a cheerleader, I was supporting people, and I won the engagement contest. And I also then basically found that I loved it. I loved that, being supportive, being a cheerleader, doing that and helping people. And I caught her attention. And Amy then invited me to actually teach a course within one of her courses, create a bonus course for one of her programs.
Mm.
And at the same time, this was 2018, which I don't know how long you've been in the online world, but there was this little thing going into effect in 2018 called the GDPR, which is the General Data Protection, no, not protection. It's the EU's data protection
Yeah.
law.
Yep.
And it was going into effect and everybody's confused and everybody's like, what do we do? And I
Is
didn't want
this
to
why I
create
have to click on the cookies thing all the time? Do you accept
kind of cookies
cookies?
is slightly different, but yeah, it's the same idea. But so I was like, I don't want to have to teach this. Let me go find a good training I can send people to. I registered for every training I could do. And I was like, I can't even understand what these people are saying. And I'm a lawyer. So how the heck is a regular business owner going to do it? So
Mhm.
I just said, you know what? I'm going to print the law out. I'm going to figure it out. And then I'm going to do a training. And so I did. And meanwhile, like Amy, I told her I was doing this. I said, hey, we can figure out the time on the course, but I'm doing this right now. And she was like, hold up, wait, I'd pay you for that. How much are you charging? I said, no, it's free. I'm just training for free, which blew her mind. So then she had me on her podcast, and my list went from a couple, or I don't know, 500 people to 4,000 people overnight,
Mm.
basically being on her podcast. Her podcast, with my episode of her podcast, was like the very end of April. I was launching my new program. I had set May 1st or May 2nd as the day I was going to actually launch my product. And I'd done that before this happened. It just happened to work out that way. And May ended up being a $70,000 month for me.
People
And
buying
I
that
was
particular course.
it was basically the introduction to selling. It was training plus legal templates. And it was all because I had changed my perspective and was just giving and engaging with people online. So
Mm.
a lot of people who purchased were people in that group. They just saw how helpful I was. And that was the start. And so I did that. And then for the next 4 years or so, I focused on selling legal templates. I then became a business coach, had another Amazon best-selling book called Email Marketing That Doesn't Suck,
Mm.
because I had to learn how to make my emails fun, because quite honestly, people don't want to hear about the law. So the email's got to be fun. I mean, your marketing needs to be fun when your topic is boring, I guess is what I said. And um, so I did a lot of different things and built a business I finally enjoyed. And then in 2023, I decided that I wanted to shift my business into a software focus. And so now what I sell is a software that has taken the place of legal templates and more. And that's been a learning curve in and of itself. I have no trainer, had no training in software development, didn't know how to code. I've taught myself a lot, and
Mm.
I'm actually currently in the process of getting a master's in software engineering,
Oh.
because I figure if I'm running a tech business, I ought to understand it a little bit better. And so that's what I've been doing now for the last couple of years, is really focusing in on that and building this software. And AI is obviously changing things in ways that is really hard to fathom.
Mm.
Uh, that things I can do now that I would have had no prayer of doing just a year and a half ago.
Mm. Where did the idea to go into software come from? Because that seems like a bit of a left turn. I mean,
So I always knew what I was selling was only a partial solution for people,
okay.
because I was giving them legal templates is basically what I was selling
So
at the
I
end of the
need a
day.
partnership agreement. I can go buy, and it's $250 or something like that.
Right. And then you fill in the blanks. We had built, my team and I had built a very rudimentary, it wasn't a software solution, but a generator. So we had taken it. So some of our agreements, you could answer questions and it would populate the thing for you. So you didn't have to do it yourself. You would still have to fill in the blanks. But so we had done that
Yep.
for some, but it was very much front end based by, writing HTML code on a very, rudimentary level.
Okay.
But what happened was, so I'll remind you of the time frame. Late November of 2022 is when ChatGPT first was available publicly.
Okay.
I had played around with it. I'm listening to a bunch of stuff. I blame it on my team member at the time. She had basically told me I needed something to do other than focus on business all the time. So she had told me find a hobby, and I took up running, which meant I had a lot of time on my hands, which meant the podcasts I listened to normally weren't enough to keep me busy. So I had to find new ones. So
Okay.
I'd found some other new ones. And there was this one podcast that was these marketers talking, and they were talking about the implications of AI. And it was the first time it clicked for me, because at first I was seeing ChatGPT. I was like, well, if I was a writer, I might be worried about this, but I didn't think much. And from this podcast, I was like, this will make so many things possible that weren't before. For example, my vision was, could I create something that really I could create a software that would operate very much like an in-house lawyer or legal group would work for a big corporation?
Mm.
Answer the basic questions, help them with a lot of different stuff, create the agreements, do all of those things. And I said, you know what? I think I could. At the time, I was very naive, thinking, oh, I can figure this stuff out.
Yeah, I can write my own large language model. Just give me a couple of
Yeah,
months.
well, and I don't even think that I thought I was going to write my large language model, but I just said, there is an opportunity here to do something bigger. And so that was the idea. And that's kind of where the germ of an idea came from. And we had developers that we'd worked with on our website before, and various things. It helped us build that, the earlier generators. And so I reached out to them, not sure if they were the right people or if maybe they could point me in the right direction. And they thought it was interesting, and we talked it through, and we brought them on. And as tends to happen, I mean, they built great software, the kind of initial stuff, but um, kind of like um, kind of like any government contract or any builder tends to cost way more and take a lot longer than any projections.
Mhm.
And so over the next year, about a year after, so 2023 into 24, they basically created two of the three core features for us, and it cost two and a half times their initial estimate for all three.
Mm.
And so I kind of slowed down development at that point. And this year I've taken over. I'm the CTO. I'm the head of the code. I write the code. I'm in charge of it with the help of AI coding agents. But I know enough and understand enough to review it,
Wow.
uh, to create all the specifications, do all that stuff. So it's been a process, but it's been fun. And now, I mean, we have a chat functionality that has a huge database of questions and answers to draw from to help people understand legal stuff and then to formulate stuff, but give transparency so they understand, hey, how much confidence should you have in this answer based upon our database, and how much of it is just, a large language model pontificating, which we all know sometimes they say some things that are kind of dumb.
Mhm.
So
So, how much of your business comes from, like, pre-built templates that you created years ago now versus this more, like, fully integrated software?
So we don't sell templates anymore. Now the
None
only
at
way to
all.
get access. No,
Totally
not. I
opposite.
mean, the all we sell now is the software. Now the software, I mean, you can purchase basically. We have different pricing models. One of them I call the Costco model. You basically have to pay an annual membership to have the right to purchase agreement credits, to just create agreements if that's all you want.
Got it.
Um, but then also there are, higher level things where people can get access to everything unlimited. But it's an interesting mix. And there's challenges in creating software for sure, because we went from a model where I got 100% of the value right up front, right? Because someone wants to buy a template, they have to pay me 100% of the value right on day one. Whereas software, it's a recurring revenue model. So you're not recapturing or capturing all that value right up front.
Right.
So, there are pros and cons, um, but it gives the flexibility to give a better answer. I mean, what the other piece besides the chat functionality is, uh, it's a task manager, but really what it is it starts, and we recommend this where people start. You go through an audit. It asks you about your business. You answer questions, and then it generates a task list for you of the legal items you have to create or deal with. And it's prioritized based on kind of I've gone through and said, what's the risk level versus what's the cost of fixing this? Like even if something is not a huge risk, but it's something that's going to take you 2 seconds and cost you nothing, it's going to be a high priority because, like, hey, let's knock those things
Yeah.
out. But it really helps people triage and understand what they need to deal with, and then there's explanations, because I always found that's the biggest problem, with business owners. When I talk to them, when I said, "What's the biggest challenge you face with legal stuff?" There's literally one phrase we hear all the time, and even if they don't use this phrase, the answer almost always is this: I don't know what I don't know about the legal stuff. I just hear that over and over again, which makes sense. I mean, why would you know about the legal
Mhm.
stuff? And so, we view our job as helping people understand it and then solve it.
Mm. What are the common things that people are turning to you and your software for? Like, what do you see just, getting used a lot?
So, I mean, mainly they're creating agreements for various purposes. I mean, that's really the value proposition for them at this point. And I tend to help coaches, course creators, what I call knowledge brands. There's not really a great phrase that applies to these people, but it's anyone who's kind of selling their knowledge or expertise, whether one on one to many, or in a coaching context. And so they're coming to me for that guidance on all of those different things, that all the different documents they need to create, all the different agreements they need to create, but even understanding. So I have a lot of people in my community who are professionals who've created a coaching business. So doctors who've created a coaching business, and they're all worried, well, can I do this? Can I not do this? How does this do? And so part of it is helping them understand, what can you do? What can't you do? And there's other folks like that who aren't doctors, but in that category where it's really kind of helping them understand what they need to deal with. Those are some of my best clients because they understand you have to deal with legal stuff. I don't have to sell them on the notion that you got to deal with legal stuff. They're just like, wait, what do I have to do? And
Mhm.
then,
Right.
which is often quite helpful.
Interesting. Where do you see, like, the future of maybe, like, your field going, this, like, software-enabled legal? assistant? Like, what do you think the limitations are for it, and what do you think the opportunities are for it?
So I think the opportunities are huge long term for everything short of litigation. And even in litigation, it'll start to have a role. But obviously, judges aren't going to let a computer stand up in court, right? I mean, so you're going to have to still do those things. But the thing is,
Not yet,
eh,
at least, right?
yeah, well,
Could you
and
imagine a Star Trek type future where, like, your supercomputer is fighting my supercomputer in logic, you know?
well, I mean, and theoretically, then it's a computer that decides. I mean,
Well,
right? I mean,
yeah,
who
you
knows?
could also yeah, I guess that actually might be the first place that
Right?
happens is a computer listens to both arguments, and then it's like, "Hey, you can't blame 78-year-old Bill who doesn't understand patent law." It's like patent
Yeah,
GPT, you know? I don't know, that doesn't seem that far-fetched to me.
yeah. The problem, of course, is, and again, part of it is I'm in a lot of different worlds because so I hang out with a lot of people who are online first, who understand technology. And it's funny to hear them talk, you would think, oh, it's already happening. But then literally I was sitting watching, I think it was the Texas versus Texas A&M football game day after Thanksgiving. I'm a Texas fan for everybody who can't see behind my, that way. There's
Well,
a Texas
we're
candle,
in
but
Columbus, so sorry that that first game of the
yeah,
season might have put
yeah,
you
yeah,
guys over
yeah.
the edge to not get you in the
Right,
playoffs.
right. But so anyway, so I think it was during that game, but maybe it was a different game. And an ad for I think it was ChatGPT, but an ad for either that or Claude comes on.
Mhm.
And my father-in-law is sitting there and he was like asking me because he basically has no conception of what it is.
Yeah.
And I think that's still a large part of the population. That's where most people are still.
Yeah, definitely my parents, like, they understand, like, they've heard of Chat GPT and AI, but they
Yeah.
would not have any use case for it in their lives.
Right. Right. And people definitely wouldn't be thinking beyond, like, a lot of people might think, oh, okay, I can chat with it and get some information. Right. So that's about the extent of it.
Yeah.
Um, so it'll be a while before people truly accept it. But and again, this will be an issue on a regulatory basis for a while. I mean, some states, state bar associations, like fought LegalZoom even for a long time on being able to sell their templates, saying that that was the practice of law. So there will be people fighting back about these things
Mhm.
against these things. But I'll just tell you, and people make points of AI makes mistakes. Well, you know what? You know who else makes
Yeah.
mistakes?
Yeah.
Lawyers. There's a lot of lawyers who make a lot of mistakes. Quite honestly, a well-trained AI model will make fewer mistakes than most lawyers will,
Yeah.
just because they don't get tired. They're not biased, or they're not biased on these issues. They might be biased on other issues, but on this type of stuff, it shouldn't be. So I think, quite honestly, it will be growing importance. I mean, the reality is a lot of AI has been happening behind the scenes for a long time. A lot of machine learning has been happening for a long time behind the scenes. It's just the front facing stuff that's different that people are seeing differently, and it's changing it. But I really think that in the world in the not too distant future, I'm not going to say you're not going to have lawyers, but you're not going to need nearly as many as we've been churning out. And that's one of the things that is scary, I think, about AI is for the first time, it is a technological revolution that is primarily impacting people who make money based on their brains,
Yeah.
not based upon services.
Mhm.
And that is a big change,
Mhm.
and it's scaring a lot of people. But in the coding world, it's definitely an issue. I mean, a lot of companies just aren't hiring junior programmers anymore because they don't need to,
Mm.
because AI can do as well as a junior programmer. And so there is a lot of concern about, okay, well, then where are the senior programmers going to come from? The people who need to understand the architecture and design architecture issues. I mean, that happens from learning these things, but we're facing an interesting revolution in the next 10, 15 years, I think.
Yeah, even me, just like as a business owner, I find like ChatGPT really helpful if I get like a long agreement and I'm like,
Yep.
I don't really want to read this and pay attention and like turn the music off and like really focus in for the next 30 minutes. I'll just
Yep.
upload it and be like, what are the important points here? And it'll
Yep.
kick me out
Yep.
six things. It's like, hey, the do not compete period is 5 years. That seems kind of long. What do you? It's like, oh, okay.
Yep.
And then I can just
Yep.
quickly summarize, and that's been really helpful for me.
Yep.
Um,
Yep. Yeah. I mean, look, I'll say, and that's the thing. And all of these areas, it just, and I would say to people, especially if the option is that or nothing, can't we all agree that having access to that is better than people having access to nothing?
Mhm.
Which, so many people, just don't have access to any of this stuff before. And it is, you know, it makes life easier on everybody. I mean, and it's just in simple ways. I mean, heck, I have a running chat GPT chat about running,
Mhm.
meaning ongoing, like I'm having it, I feed it in my training data and get insights from it and give ideas. And it helps me understand what I should be doing for my next level of running and what I should be doing for, my speeds on these training runs. And so, before, that wasn't something that was available. Now it is. And it just is a hugely valuable tool that we all need to embrace, is my view. Or otherwise we're going to be left behind.
It's funny you say that because one of my friends is a triathlete coach, and he's like, I just think like, non-custom plans are going to go by the wayside. People are just going to be like, ChatGPT, make me a
Oh yeah.
marathon plan.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's like, it's funny because the very first time I ran and was I ran a marathon in 2009. It was, I don't want to say it was a challenge. Like 2009, I started the year, couldn't run a tenth of a mile, joined a gym, and I was just working out, running on treadmill and doing other things like that while going to the gym. And then in August was my grandmother's, I think, 95th birthday. And I was there and I had lost a ton of weight. And so I was chatting with my cousin. She said, I always thought I'd like to run a marathon in Vegas. I was like, that'd be interesting. I looked it up. Sure enough, there was a rock and roll marathon in Vegas. So I signed up for it. And I went and found just one of those PDF plans online. And that's how I figured out how to run a marathon. I knew nothing about it, didn't understand what I was doing, but so I did. Now, I mean, I've got a program on my phone that I use that is building my plans for me. And I just, I don't know why people wouldn't just use those, especially versus, those old non-custom plans.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. The other thing that I've found it to be really helpful with is if I'm like thinking through like a math problem or like something in our business, like, okay, what would the benefit that I need to take from this for it to be worth it?
Yep.
And I'll plug in like some rudimentary base level data and it'll just like kind of talk me through the logic and do all the mathematics for me. Like I was thinking about hiring an advisor, um, like seeking out funding and investing. And
Yep.
I was like, okay, I know what their fee is. Like, what would I need to save on my interest? Because that's what he told me. He's like, we'll save this money for you on your interest rate. And I'm like, well, is that true? And I'm like, well, now I'm thinking like, well, how long is the mortgage? What's the amortization schedule? Like, and I have no idea, like, mentally how to like go to Excel and put this problem together. I mean, I could,
Yeah.
poke around through some cells, but I threw it in a chat GPT and they're like, boom, you need to get like a 50
Yep.
bips decrease for their
Yep.
fee to be worth it. I was like, wow, that was really fast and helpful. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I use it as a sounding board for thinking things through, for prioritizing projects, for prioritizing the backlog for the software. Now, because I have thoughts, but I also know I'm probably biased, and so I use it as a sounding board. I don't trust anything that it comes up with automatically. I challenge it. One of the things I found, part of the problem, of course, is they are trained to keep us engaged. So they're
Interesting.
always,
Are they? I didn't know that.
well, if you ever watch it, I mean, almost every
Well, it'll
one,
always be
like it,
like, would you like me to, prep that draft to that agreement for you?
exactly.
Like, no,
It's
no, no,
always
no.
going to ask you for that next step. But also, I mean, unless you really train it not to, I mean, it, it kind of, it's a brown noser. I mean, they are really, they talk about how wonderful you are is what they tend to do. And it doesn't do it expressly, but it's like, oh, that's a brilliant idea
Yeah.
is what it tends to say. So I've trained it not to. I'm quite proud of myself. I've gotten my coding assistants to cuss at me a few times because
Mm.
I cuss at them so much that, I'm like, I've trained you well when when you're actually dropping the F bomb back to me. That's a good sign.
Yeah, it's fun. It's funny you
Um,
say that about brown nosing. That same problem that I was working through. I was like, well, what if I would to double this loan? And they're like, well, it's the same exact thing because the fees scale, perpendicularly or in parallel. And I was
yeah,
like, oh, I'm like, I would have thought that the larger the loan, the larger amount of interest. And they're like, totally understand. And that's a logical way of thinking about it. But it's like, oh, it's like, thanks for,
yeah,
throwing off
yeah.
my inability in mathematics there for me.
Yeah, yeah. And again, you're right with math. I do remember at some point. I mean, I don't even remember. It was some math problem my daughter was looking at, and Look, I was really good at math as a kid, but the way they teach math these days, I don't understand.
Yeah.
Plus, I've forgotten a lot, and so I literally took a picture of her problem, and it helped me solve it. So I was like, sweet.
Yeah.
Another use for ChatGPT in the future is I'm having to help my daughter with her homework.
Yeah, the problem I had, they had, like, these complex equations with symbols that I was like, "I don't even know what this is," and I was like, "Wow, this is cool." What are the other
Yeah.
things that you're using it for?
So I use it actually. We have AI involved in helping us find. I mean, it's an actual system finding and pitching me to podcasts of all
Oh.
things. So instead of hiring someone to do it, we have a system that has a big database. It matches you with people, and it creates a first draft. I then review it. I review who we're pitching to because I don't want to pitch to non-relevant podcasts and do that. But it takes a lot of the work out that would, otherwise could be a full-time job on staff, and instead, turns it into a 30-minute a week kind of project. So
Mm.
things like that we use it for. There are other little things we're building things to help with content. Obviously, because it's legal stuff, I have to really give an eagle eye and make sure that it's accurate. I can't just trust the content it pumps out, but it can give me good first drafts. I've created a lot of drafts of um, series of articles that I want to create and I'm going to create basically, and it helps me in some sense figure those things out. But also to take concepts, we have a big database, like I said, that database of questions and answers. I mean, that was seeded with questions we got from beta users in our software. So I was able to feed that in and then said, hey, look at all these questions that we've got, and from that the AI was able to help me create a content plan of saying let's figure out
Mm.
piece of content we could create that will answer some of the most common topics and questions we're getting from people. So things like that it's very helpful for, because it can sort through the thousands of questions we got in a way that I never could, right? I mean, I could theoretically, but it would take me weeks or months to really sort through and kind of categorize all this stuff. Whereas it can just look at it and, within 10 seconds, it's read it and digested all that and understands and can kind of give you some good summaries. So I use it for a lot of that kind of stuff as well on a daily basis to really help move things along.
Mm. Where do you think the future of your software company is? It sounds like you're doing some internal development still yourself, but what's kind of the next way to level that business up?
So a couple things. Right now, the agreements you can create are very much still templated out. So it's you're answering questions, and there's logic behind the scenes that then selects to include or exclude clauses, et cetera, based upon that. But as you can imagine, I mean, that deals with 80, 85% of use cases. But people, there's always going to be unique use cases that you just can't template out. And so part of what we want to do is build AI capabilities, train AI so that it can help people to, swap out clauses, to really customize agreements in a very tailored way so that they can feel like, hey, I answered questions and it's generated exactly what I need. So that's one layer of it. There will be additional things where I want to add in IP functionality to it for trademarks, help people search for trademarks, understand, can they use brand names, can they not?
I like that.
Uh,
That makes sense to me.
yeah, and then eventually help them to do filings for trademarks if they want to. Although, quite honestly, with a lot of people, they don't need to do that. But if they want to, I want that capability built in. So, like I said, the vision for me really is to build it out so that it's kind of doing everything for people who can't afford a lawyer.
Well, you being a patent guy, I'm sure you've already thought of this, but is there a situation where an AI can help you write your patent? Because I know
Oh
that
yeah,
isn't a costly thing. They could probably draw you pictures and everything, right?
oh yeah. I mean, you could definitely get AI help to help with that. The folks I work with, that doesn't tend to be a use case, but definitely, I have floated a couple of ideas for software um, to patent lawyers I know. I mean, some of it is drafting the patent, some of it is doing stuff after the fact. So when you get a patent lawsuit, sometimes people want to go back to the patent office and challenge it at the patent office. And
Yes.
I mean, it could definitely do those things. It could come up with, find the stuff, do the searches. So there are definite use cases there. We probably won't build that in anytime soon just because the folks I deal with aren't really patents aren't the area of law that they need help with. It's trademarks, it's copyrights, it's things like that. And so helping people with that will be useful. But like I said, I have big dreams. I've learned not to promise things to people because it you know, even still things take longer than they should. Um, but the goal really becomes to create a solution that is a complete solution for people. So, they feel like, hey, I have complete legal protection. I mean, quite honestly, what I would really like is to build something so that it kind of in a non-creepy way follows them around the internet and scans their website, identifies, hey, here's something, it looks like you have a sales page for a program that we've never created an agreement for. Do you want to create an agreement for it? Or, they can put in their socials and it'll monitor their socials to make sure they're not doing anything illegal there and highlight and flag issues for them in real time, basically like having a lawyer looking over their shoulder.
Mhm.
So that's the long-term vision. That involves a lot of work, but the hope is, hey, we build stuff slowly but surely, and it works out that way.
That's cool, man. And I know you got a cutoff here, but I do have a last question. I do own a patent. I have a patent for a all glass food storage container. I've
Okay.
not commercialized it yet. I got 50 employees, man, and I'm just like running around trying to manage that. But what are the things that you think that I should be thinking about with my patent as it kind of progresses forward? I got like 18 years left or something.
Yeah. So you've already got the patent, you
I
said?
have the patent. Yes.
Okay. You look, the problem with patents are that they're valuable to an extent, but there's limits. You should be monitoring it. But the question becomes, when is it worth actually pursuing anything under it? And without seeing the patent itself, it's hard to say because the contours of the claims matter quite a bit.
Hmm.
And for people who don't know the way patents work, patents you oftentimes have to put multiple elements to a claim, and so a patent is only infringed if all of those things are present in the infringing product or the product that you're suing about. And so part of the difficulty is if it's something that could easily be designed around, it doesn't have a ton of value. But you should definitely be monitoring it, keeping track on the industry,
Hmm.
or you might just want to sell it to somebody. It might be worthwhile or potentially worthwhile to sell it to somebody. What I say is, it all depends. The value tends to be in different places. Most of the value these days is in more of the high tech stuff
Hmm.
for obvious reasons, because that's where you have a lot of amorphous things and a lot of amorphous claims that you can potentially go after people for.
Mm. What if I actually want to sell the product? That's another whole world, right?
Yeah, and again, having the patent, and if you actually sell the product, there's value because um, if someone infringes, then you can get higher damages
Oh,
realistically
okay.
if you're actually selling and marketing the product. If you're not marketing the product, you tend to get lower damages just because realistically, it's hard to explain. But the way courts look at it is effectively damages in a patent case are what reasonable parties coming to the negotiating table would what are the terms they would agree to.
Okay.
And if you think about it, if you're not actually producing the product, you're willing to take
Yeah, 10
less.
grand would be great. I've only
Right.
spent maybe 3 or 4 grand on this and I've sold $0. So
Right.
like if someone started infringing, like it's
Right.
hard to make a
Whereas
case that I'm losing $5 million.
right. And again, I mean, it's lower, but you still get less. But on the other hand, if you're actually selling a product and they come in and do it, it's like, well, hey, you're literally taking sales away from me. I would, because I'm a competitor, I would want to protect my monopoly that I get from this. So
Right.
you would have a much higher value for it. And so there's a lot of things that go into it. But what I tell people is you should think of patents as they're a nice to have. They're something that, if you have a physical product, if you're dealing with those things, but don't expect them necessarily to protect you. Just because they're expensive to enforce. There's a lot of things along the way, but if you have an innovative invention, it's worth pursuing. That's for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, I've also heard that if you don't like litigate things that come along, does that make it more challenging in the future to litigate? Like if
Not
if
necessarily.
if I just wouldn't touch it for 5 years, let this product get flooded into the market, and then I go, "All right, now it's time to start going after these guys."
Yes and no.
Okay.
It isn't necessarily a huge problem because, so what I'll tell you, it's different than trademarks. So, trademarks, for example, if you don't defend a trademark, you can lose the ability.
Okay.
So, if you have a brand name, and even with the brand name, it's you have to avoid certain things. Like, for example, Google would not want you to say, I Googled it,
Okay.
because that you can't use a trademark as a verb
Okay.
or it can lose meaning. And even
Oh,
like Kleenex as another example.
Xerox, right?
Yeah, Xerox, exactly. But it's like Kleenex would tell people, do not use the word Kleenex as a replacement for facial tissue. Because if you do that, you can lose protection. So trademarks
Mm.
and branding, it's way more important to defend it. Patents, you don't have to. Now, there used to be a theory called latches, which was, without getting too nerdy here. When it comes to legal concepts, there's concepts which are from a statute directly. It's written in a law somewhere. And then there's what are called common law, which is judge
Yep.
created things over time.
Yep.
Latches is a judge created idea and a defense that essentially said, hey, if you sit on your rights, you lose them. And that used to apply, but the Supreme Court has recently said in cases where there are clear statutes of limitations, where it says you can sue for up damages for 5 years, you cannot use latches to prevent it. So you theoretically have the ability to sue someone for the complete back damages for the period within it. And I think it's, don't quote me on this, I don't know why my brain is farty on this, but I think it's 6 years. So you can go back 6 years of damages. So it's not like you can't, but you might have a tougher time,
Got it.
but not necessarily. I mean, quite honestly, it's better than doing it at the very beginning, because if it's at the very beginning,
They haven't
you
sold
know,
anything yet.
yeah, and it's not going to be worth that much. And you have to think about, and you have to find a lawyer who's going to be willing to take it on a contingency potentially, and pay for experts and do all those things. And so there needs to be some value there to make it worthwhile.
That's interesting. It's almost like let them accrue some profit and then I try to take it, as opposed to if I send them a demand letter and they go, okay, well, we've done $2,000 in sales. Like, it's tough to make a case that they owe me $1 million.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so again,
Hmm.
it is a weird thing. And again, sometimes, almost every patent case ultimately gets resolved by just a lump sum payment. They're just going to agree to pay you some amount of money, which gives them the right to use it forever. Which is one of those funny things, because that's actually not how most commercial deals would be done. Most commercial deals would be a running royalty over time, right? I mean, you'd be like, for every unit you sell, you're going to pay me $2 or something like that. But
Yep.
very few patent lawsuits get resolved that way. So
Why is that? Because they just don't want to deal with each other, like, on a long-term basis?
yes, I mean, it's that, but it's also, if you think about it, it creates, like, if it's a business relationship where you actually formed an agreement, you would assume you have a good relationship.
Yeah.
So you trust each
Yeah.
other. When it's happening in a lawsuit, you tend not to trust the other side.
Right, right.
So are you really going to believe that they're going to tell you, they're going to actually properly report the numbers? I mean, by the time you get to that point in a lawsuit, oftentimes people hate each other. And so the problem is, if you were going to do one of those things, me as a plaintiff, I would have to have the right to audit your books. You don't want me auditing your books. And, it can just get very complicated. So that's why you just do it. Plus, quite honestly, most plaintiffs would rather just take the money.
Mm.
They would just rather have the money today. So,
I'll give you one story and then I'll cut you loose. I had a guy on the podcast. He owned a golf simulator business, and there
okay.
was another guy, like, somewhere, around the world, who had a golf simulator business with the same name. I think this is the story. And he is like, I'm going to, find this guy and I'm going to call him. Might have been in the same country. I don't remember exactly, but he's like, I'm going to find this guy and call them. This is bullshit. They got the same name as me. And he's like, I call the guy and I'm thinking, like, I'm going to really, give it to him on the phone. He's like, 2 hours later, I was like, I like this guy. He's like, the guy bought my company like 6 years later. I was like, what a
Wow.
crazy story. He's like, yeah, no, I really like that guy. He was cool. He's like, we eventually, like, we're trading ideas back and forth. We figured the name thing out, and then eventually he bought my company. I was like, well,
Yeah.
that's a good end to that story. So
Yeah. And look, I always tell people, and it's one of these things, people always want to, like, I don't know. They just assume the worst in everybody.
mhm.
And so they just want to send a mean, nasty email the first time. Like, and in most business stuff, especially on naming issues and branding issues, I'm like, for the most part, if people did it, it was a
Yeah,
mistake. And so just be nice. Send them an email, say, hey, I don't know if you know, but I have a trademark for this name. I'd prefer if you'd stop using it. And most times they'll stop.
yeah.
So, don't be don't be mean.
Yeah.
You know, you'll do much better by just being a polite, nice person first. And look, if they then escalate, great. You know, I mean, I'm happy to be mean and be ruthless,
Hmm.
but I'm not going to be the first one to be mean. That's for sure.
I like that. Bobby, where can people find your stuff and find your website?
Yeah, so the website's plainlylegal.com. If people want to connect with me more broadly, you know, if your audience, for example, they're not coaches, course creators, et cetera, you know, you can find me on LinkedIn. Search Bobby Klinck, or I think it may be, my name is Bobby Klinck, but my actual page is Robert Klinck, but you can find me that way. And that's the best way to find me, because I tend not to post a ton on stuff, but I'm happy to connect with people. So
Sweet. Bobby, thank you, man. I appreciate you.
thanks. Been a lot of fun.